struggling to pay for a babysitter. A poor woman brings her son to work and nearly faints when the boy calls her billionaire boss Dad in front of everyone. Sarah Cooper stared at her computer screen, her eyes burning as the financial spreadsheets blurred before her. The digital clock in the lower corner read 11:47 p.m., and she was still desperately trying to find a magical fix to make the numbers work. There had to be a mistake in her calculations. There just had to be. But after reviewing for the 5th time, the harsh reality remained the same. Her salary was no longer covering her expenses. With a heavy sigh, she closed the laptop and sank into the chair by her small dining table. The apartment was silent, except for the gentle hum of the humidifier in Nate's room. She allowed herself a brief moment of weakness, letting a solitary tear roll down her cheek before wiping it away briskly with the back of her hand. "Strong mums don't cry," she muttered to herself, repeating the mantra she'd clung to for the past 4 years. Ever since she found out she was pregnant, she had promised both herself and the little being growing inside her that she'd be strong enough for 2. A sound from Nate's room made her stand up instantly. She tiptoed across the hallway, gently pushing open the door adorned with smiling dinosaur stickers. Nate slept peacefully, his light brown hair, so much like hers, sprawled across the pillow. Her son was the epitome of innocence, hugging his favorite plush T-Rex, blissfully unaware of the adult worries looming over them. Sarah adjusted the blanket around him, allowing her fingers to softly graze his rosy cheek. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that they might need to move to a smaller apartment, or that they might no longer afford the swim classes he loved so much? She went back to the living room and picked up the crumpled letter on the table. Mrs. Martinez's words, her babysitter for 3 years, still stung as though she were reading them for the first time. "Dear Sarah, I'm so sorry, but I can't continue anymore. You've been more than an employer, you've been a friend. But with the delayed payments these past months, I can't keep up with my own bills. I hope you understand. I wish you and little Nate all the best. Sincerely, Elena Martinez." Sarah couldn't blame her. Elena had been more than patient, accepting partial payments and promises of next month. But everyone has a limit, and she had clearly reached hers. The piercing sound of the alarm jolted Sarah out of her gloomy thoughts the following morning. 5:30 a.m. She had to hurry if she wanted to drop Nate off at preschool before rush hour. "Nate, honey, time to get up," she called gently, stepping into her son's room. To her surprise, he was already sitting in bed, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Mom, my throat hurts," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. Sarah's heart tightened as she touched his forehead. It was hot, very hot. "Oh, my love," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. "Let's check your temperature." The thermometer confirmed her suspicion. 101.3 degrees ski, not high enough for the ER, but definitely too high for preschool. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing to find a solution. Elena was no longer an option. Her mother lived across the country. Her savings barely covered next month's rent. Taking the day off meant not only losing a day's pay, but also risking her position at the company during a crucial end-of-quarter period. Her phone vibrated, her supervisor reminding her about the important departmental meeting that afternoon. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Mom," Nate's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you sad?" Sarah forced a smile, ruffling her son's hair. "No, sweetie, just thinking. How about a special day today?" Nate's eyes lit up, feverish though they were. "Special how?" "How about seeing where I work?" Nate's face brightened momentarily, then was overtaken by a dry cough. Sarah hugged him close, already mentally listing what she'd need to make it work. A tablet loaded with educational games, fever medicine, water, quiet snacks, a few coloring books. An hour later, Sarah was driving through the financial district, casting worried glances in the rearview mirror at Nate, who had dozed off in the back seat. He was bundled up in his favorite Avengers hoodie, a backpack full of activities at his feet. She parked in the basement of the towering glass and steel building where she'd worked for 5 years. 5 years, building a reputation as a competent, dedicated professional. 5 years proving herself in a predominantly male environment. And now, She was about to risk it all. "Nate, honey, we're here," she called gently, opening the back door. He woke up disoriented, eyes heavy with fever and fatigue. "I'm tired, Mom," he mumbled as she lifted him out of the car seat. "I know, sweetie. You can rest more upstairs," she promised, cradling him in her arms. Her heart pounded as she headed for the elevators, Nate's backpack on one shoulder and her work briefcase on the other. The lobby was buzzing with executives arriving for another workday. Sarah kept her head high, pretending not to notice the curious glances directed at her and the sleepy child in her arms. She pressed the elevator button, silently praying she could reach her floor without running into any teammates. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah hesitated for a moment. She was about to break every unspoken rule of corporate life, but feeling the heat of Nate's fever against her neck, she knew she had no choice. It was this or lose everything she'd fought for. "Last resort," she muttered to herself, stepping into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the mirrored wall, a 32-year-old woman with brown hair in a neat professional bun, wearing a navy blue blazer that contrasted starkly with the small, vulnerable boy in her arms. It felt like the embodiment of the conflict between motherhood and career. The elevator stopped on the 12th floor, and Sarah took a deep breath before stepping out. The accounting department was nearly empty, one perk of arriving early. She moved quickly to her office, silently thanking the higher-ups for granting her a private space after her last promotion. She closed the door softly behind her, finally allowing her shoulders to relax a bit. Her office wasn't large, but there was enough room to improvise a comfortable spot for Nate. She gently placed him on the small sofa she used for reading long reports, covering him with the blanket she'd brought from home. "Mommy's going to work right here," she explained, pointing to her desk just a few steps away. "If you need anything, just call me quietly, okay?" Nate nodded sleepily, already clutching the T-Rex she'd wisely included. Sarah kissed his forehead, still hot, though not as bad as earlier, and went to her desk. She turned on her computer and began organizing her tasks for the day, determined to prove she could handle this impossible situation. As the morning wore on, the office came to life. Sarah could hear her colleagues' voices through the door, the familiar sounds of another day beginning. Nate slept for almost 2 hours, waking only when she gently nudged him to take more fever medication. "Miss Cooper?" a soft voice called after a discreet knock on the door. It was Amanda, one of the junior analysts on her team. "Come in," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice casual even as her heart raced. Amanda opened the door and froze, surprised to see Nate, who was now sitting on the sofa and absorbed in his tablet. "Oh," she whispered, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "I didn't know we had such a special visitor today." Before Sarah could explain, Amanda was already moving toward Nate. "Hi there, little one. What's your name?" "Nate," he answered shyly, looking up from the tablet. "Do you work with my mom?" "I sure do. And she's the best boss I've ever had," Amanda said, winking at Sarah before turning back to Nate. "That's a cool game you're playing. What is it?" As Nate excitedly explained his educational dinosaur game, Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for her team. Amanda could easily have reacted differently, could have been uncomfortable or made a remark about the inappropriateness of the situation. Instead, she was there, genuinely interested in making Nate feel welcome. Throughout the morning, other colleagues found excuses to drop by. Each showed not just understanding, but discreet offers of help. Carol, the department secretary, brought a pack of cookies from her drawer. Michael, the senior accountant, casually mentioned he had some kid-friendly games on his tablet if Nate wanted a change of pace. Around noon, Sarah began to think maybe, just maybe, she would survive the day. Nate was behaving surprisingly well, alternating between naps, quiet games, and drawing. His fever had decreased, and he even managed to eat some of the lunch she'd brought from home. "Mum?" Nate called while she was replying to a particularly complex email. "Yes, honey? When I grow up, I want to work in a place just like this," he declared with all the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster. Sarah felt her eyes well up. "Really? Why's that?" "Because everyone here is as nice as you," he answered simply, turning his attention back to his coloring book. Those innocent words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her son saw her as an example, someone kind and making a difference. And here she was, feeling like a fraud, a professional on the brink of collapse, a mother unable to provide stability for her child. But perhaps she was being too hard on herself. Looking around, she saw small gestures of solidarity from her team. She saw her son who, even though he was sick, was behaving admirably, proud to be at work with her. She saw the reports on her desk, all up to date despite the circumstances. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but maybe being strong didn't mean having all the answers or never needing help. Maybe being strong meant pressing on, even when the road wasn't ideal, and accepting help when it was offered. Sarah got up and walked to the sofa, sitting beside Nate. He immediately snuggled against her, his small body still a bit warm from the fever. "You know what?" she said, kissing the top of his head. "You're right. People here are very nice. And do you know another reason why?" "Why?" "Because they help me be a better mom." Nate smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face and made his eyes sparkle. "You're already the best mom in the whole world." Sarah hugged her son tighter, allowing herself to believe, if only for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of reports, discreet phone calls, and stolen moments to check Nate's temperature. By the time the clock hit 5 p.m., Sarah started packing up, exhausted but grateful she'd somehow made it through that impossible day. "Ready to go home, champ?" she asked, helping Nate put his toys back into his backpack. He nodded, yawning. "Can we come back another day?" Sarah chuckled softly, lifting him into her arms. "Let's hope we won't have to, sweetie." But it was a special day, wasn't it? As she walked toward the elevator, Nate already dozing off in her arms, Sarah reflected on how a day that began as her last resort had turned into a memory she'd treasure despite all the worries. There were still many challenges ahead: finding a new babysitter, fixing her financial troubles, keeping her career on track. But today she'd learned something important. Sometimes, when we think we're at our limit, life surprises us by showing that we're not alone. Sarah was staring at her computer screen with a mix of concentration and concern. The email she had just received made her stomach do flips. An emergency meeting on the executive floor in 2 hours, mandatory attendance for all department managers, and a presentation of the quarterly reports. "Great," she muttered, glancing sideways at Nate, who was quietly playing in the little area she'd improvised in the corner of her office. Since that first day she brought him in, it had become more common to see him around, and especially after his preschool started unexpected renovations. Most employees had grown used to occasionally seeing Nate, and he, for his part, had learned to behave admirably in the corporate environment. But a meeting on the executive floor, that was different, completely different. "Nate, sweetie," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "Mum's going to a very important meeting soon." The boy raised his eyes from his building blocks. "Can I come?" "Not this time, honey." Sarah bit her lip, thinking fast. "How about you stay here in Mommy's office? I'll leave your favorite games on the tablet, some snacks, and Amanda will check on you from time to time." Nate pouted. "But you said I'm your special assistant." The innocent comment made Sarah smile despite her anxiety. Over the past few weeks, to keep Nate well behaved at work, she'd created a whole imaginary world where he was her junior executive assistant in charge of important missions like organizing pencils by color and ensuring no stapler felt sad and lonely. "And you are my most important assistant," she assured him, kneeling so they were at eye level. "That's why I need you to take care of our office while I'm away. It's a top secret, very special mission." Nate's eyes sparkled at the prospect of a new mission. "What's the mission, Mom?" "You have to make sure no villains come in and steal our super important documents," Sarah explained, trying to turn necessity into a game. "And you also need to feed our invisible friends with these cookies." She pulled out a pack of chocolate cookies, the emergency stash she kept for moments like this. Nate's eyes went wide. "They're the special cookies." "Exactly. Only for the best assistants." Sarah ruffled his hair affectionately. "So do you accept the mission?" Nate nodded solemnly, giving her a clumsy salute that melted Sarah's heart. She hugged him tightly, inhaling the sweet scent of kids' shampoo in his hair. "Mommy loves you so much, you know that?" "I love you too, Mom, to infinity and beyond." Sarah laughed at the Buzz Lightyear reference, Nate's current favorite hero. She stood up and returned to her desk, needing to finalize the reports before the meeting. The next 2 hours were an exercise in juggling the presentation prep and keeping Nate entertained. Amanda, her faithful junior analyst, came by to help as soon as she heard about the situation. "Don't worry, Ms. Cooper," she whispered, as Sarah organized her notes. "I'll keep an eye on him." "Amanda, you're an angel," Sarah said with relief. "Message me if anything happens." With one last glance at Nate, absorbed in an educational tablet game, Sarah grabbed her briefcase and left the office. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt especially slow that day, giving her mind time to spin through all kinds of potential disasters. The main boardroom on the top floor was intimidating by itself, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city and an enormous oval mahogany table dominating the space. Sarah took her seat among the other managers, exchanging tense smiles. Everyone knew that emergency meetings rarely brought good news. The CEO, James Morrison, entered the room with his usual commanding presence. Tall, impeccably dressed in an Italian suit, his piercing green eyes had a way of seeming to read everyone's mind. Sarah always tried to avoid direct eye contact. There was something about him that made her inexplicably uneasy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice filling the room, "we're here to discuss significant discrepancies found in our recent financial reports." Sarah's heart sped up. Her team had worked day and night on those reports, and she was absolutely sure they were accurate. Unless, her train of thought was cut short by movement at the glass door. Her blood ran cold. There, wearing his Iron Man overalls and a mischievous grin, stood Nate. Before she could react, before she could even blink, her son was already inside the room. The executives, focused on James's presentation, hadn't even noticed the small figure approaching. "As you can see from the chart," James continued, pointing to a projection on the wall, "our last quarter's numbers—" "Daddy!" The word echoed through the room like a bomb. Nate stood halfway between the door and the table, his eyes wide, fixed on James, a huge smile on his face. Time seemed to freeze. James stopped mid-sentence, his face a mask of confusion. The executives looked from Nate to him, then to Sarah, who sat paralyzed in her chair. That's when it happened. James looked at Nate, then at Sarah, and she saw the exact moment recognition dawned in his eyes. That conference 5 years ago. The hotel bar. The night she could never quite forget, all color drained from James's face. "I knew it was you," Nate went on, oblivious to the chaos he had caused. "I saw you the other day in the hallway. You look just like the pictures Mom keeps on her—" "Nate!" Sarah finally found her voice, jumping to her feet so abruptly her chair nearly toppled over. "Sweetie, you shouldn't be here." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah could feel everyone's eyes on her, some shocked, some curious, some barely hiding amusement. But the only look that mattered was James Morrison's, and it pierced her like icy daggers. "Ladies and gentlemen," James's voice was controlled, but Sarah could sense the fury beneath it. "Let's take a 15-minute break." No one dared to argue. The executives began getting up and leaving the room, some casting sympathetic glances at Sarah, others clearly trying to hide their smirks. "Ms. Cooper," James said once they were nearly alone, "my office, now." Sarah nodded mechanically, scooping Nate into her arms. Her son, sensing the sudden tension, had lost all his initial enthusiasm. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" The worried tone in his voice nearly broke her heart. "No, baby, you just got a little too excited. Let's go find Amanda, okay?" As though summoned, Amanda appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Ms. Cooper, I'm so sorry. He said he was going to the bathroom and—" "It's fine, Amanda," Sarah cut in, trying to keep her voice steady. "Could you take Nate back to my office and stay with him until I get back, please?" As Amanda led a confused Nate away, Sarah took a deep breath and headed for James Morrison's office. Each step felt like it brought her closer to a cliff's edge. The CEO's corner office took up the most prestigious space on the floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. But Sarah barely noticed. James stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders tense as a drawn bowstring. "Close the door," he ordered without turning around. Sarah obeyed, her heart hammering in her chest. For a few moments, the distant sound of traffic was the only noise in the room. "What kind of game is this?" James finally turned, his green eyes blazing with anger. "It's not a game," Sarah replied, keeping her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "No," he gave a harsh laugh. "So you want me to believe it's pure coincidence that you landed a job at my company, brought your child to work, and—" "I didn't know," Sarah interrupted, her own anger rising. "I've been working here for 5 years, long before you became CEO. And for your information, I only realized it was you a few weeks ago when I saw you in the hallway for the first time." James studied her for a moment, as if searching for lies. "The conference in Chicago?" "It wasn't a question." Sarah nodded slowly. "Just that once," she said quietly. "You were there representing your former company. We met at the hotel bar after the lectures. We talked for hours. You said you were leaving your job but never mentioned where you were headed. And I'm supposed to assume you also never mentioned not being on birth control," he growled. Sarah's face flushed with anger. "I was on the pill, but I had an infection and took antibiotics. The doctor never warned me about interference. By the time I found out I was pregnant, you were gone. I had no last name, no contacts, nothing beyond a first name and a handful of memories." James raked a hand through his perfectly styled hair, slightly messing it up. "This is absurd, completely absurd. How can I be sure this child is really—" "Get a test," Sarah cut in, her voice as sharp as steel. "Do all the tests you want. I have nothing to hide." He stared at her for a long moment before dropping heavily into his leather chair. "Fine. We'll do a DNA test. And until then, I suggest we keep this absolutely quiet. I can arrange a confidentiality agreement and, of course, appropriate financial compensation for your inconvenience." Sarah felt as if he'd slapped her. "Inconvenience?" she repeated, incredulous. "Is that how you see your own child? As an inconvenience?" "We don't know if he's my child," James retorted coldly. "Look at him," Sarah exploded. "Look into his eyes. They're exactly like yours. The same green, the same shape. He even has your smile." "Coincidences happen," he said, though doubt flickered in his voice. "Either way, my assistant will contact you to schedule the test. As for the financial arrangement—" "I don't want your money," Sarah snapped, squaring her shoulders. "I never did. I spent 4 years raising my son alone, building my career on my own merits. I'm not about to sell out now." She turned toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "You know what's ironic? Nate's been asking me about you these last few months, not because I said anything, but because he noticed how much you two look alike when he saw you. He was so happy today, so hopeful." She shook her head sadly. What kind of man sees hope in a child's eyes and responds with lawyers and confidentiality agreements? Without waiting for a reply, Sarah opened the door and walked out, keeping her posture straight even though she felt like collapsing inside. It wasn't until she was alone in the elevator that she let the first tears fall. They weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of anger. Anger at herself for letting this situation happen. Anger at James for his calculated coldness. And above all, anger for the hurt look she knew she'd see in her son's eyes when she returned to him. The elevator stopped at her floor, and Sarah took a steadying breath, wiping her face. She needed to be strong now. Strong for Nate, who didn't ask to be caught in this mess. Strong for herself, because that was all she knew how to be for so long. When she entered her office, she found Nate sleeping on the small sofa, Amanda sitting close by, scribbling notes in a folder. "He was really upset," Amanda whispered. "Worried he did something wrong. He fell asleep after I read him a few stories." Sarah's heart clenched. "Thank you, Amanda, for everything." The young analyst smiled kindly. "He's an incredible kid, Ms. Cooper. Whatever's going on, it'll be okay." After Amanda left, Sarah sat next to her sleeping son, watching his peaceful face. Even asleep, the resemblance to James was undeniable. How could he not see it? Or maybe he did, and it frightened him even more. "I'm so sorry, my love," she whispered, stroking Nate's hair. The white envelope felt like it weighed a ton in Sarah's hands. The lab logo in the upper corner practically shouted at her, reminding her that inside these pages was the confirmation of what she'd known for 4 years. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Positive. 99.9999% probability of paternity, even though she already knew. Seeing the numbers spelled out in black and white made her stomach churn. Her desk phone rang, making her jump. "Ms. Cooper," James's assistant said in a cold, professional tone, "Mr. Morrison requests your presence in his office immediately." Sarah glanced at the clock. 8:30 a.m. He must have just received his copy of the results too. "I'll be there in 5, she replied, hanging up. From her office window, she could see Nate playing on the company's playground with other kids. The corporate daycare had become his haven in the past few weeks, ever since the incident in the boardroom. He looked happy there, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. "Amanda," she called to her analyst passing by in the corridor, "could you keep an eye on Nate for me? I have an important meeting." "Sure thing, Ms. Cooper," Amanda smiled, well accustomed to such requests. "He's getting really popular in the playground, you know? All the other kids want to play with him." Sarah forced a smile, picking up her briefcase. The walk to James's office had never felt so long. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and marched toward the CEO's suite with determination. James was standing by the window, just like the day of their first confrontation. But something was different this time. His shoulders were tense, and there was a glass of whiskey on his desk, highly unusual for this hour of the morning. "Close the door," he said without turning. Sarah obeyed, staying near the door. The silence stretched on for several seconds before James finally faced her. "I assume you've seen the results," he said, his voice tight with control. "Yes, and..." Sarah arched an eyebrow. "And what exactly?" "The results just confirm what I've been saying for weeks, what I've known for 4 years." James picked up the whiskey glass, swirling the amber liquid absently. "This changes everything." "No," Sarah replied firmly. "It changes nothing. Nate is still the same wonderful boy he's always been. I'm still the same dedicated mother. The only person who has to decide what changes is you. You don't understand." He ran a hand through his hair, an action Sarah now recognized as a sign of agitation. "I have an established life, a reputation to uphold. The press will have a field day when they find out the CEO of Morrison Enterprises has a secret child with one of his employees." "Secret child," Sarah repeated, outraged. "He's not a dirty secret you need to hide, James. He's a child. An amazing child who, for some inexplicable reason, is already excited by the idea of you as his dad." James leaned over his desk, bracing himself with both hands. "This can't get out, under any circumstances. If this story goes public..." "You're going to fire me," Sarah finished, stepping closer. "Is that it? Your big solution is to intimidate me." "If necessary," he answered coldly, "keep your distance. Keep Nate out of my way. And don't even think about making this public." Sarah felt a wave of anger so intense she had to clench her fists to stay calm. "You know what your problem is, James. You're so obsessed with your precious reputation that you can't see what's right in front of you. You can't see that you have a chance to get to know an incredible person, to be part of someone's life who could love you unconditionally." "You don't know anything about me," James growled. "No," she agreed. "I don't. And clearly, I was mistaken that night in Chicago, because the man I talked to for hours, the one who spoke about dreams and ambitions, who actually seemed to have a heart, would never treat his own child like an inconvenience." Turning to leave, Sarah paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Oh, and don't worry. I won't tell anyone that the great James Morrison is too much of a coward to face his own son." She left before he could respond, shutting the door harder than necessary. Only once she was alone in the elevator did she let her tears of rage flow. Back at the company playground, Nate played happily with the other children. Upon seeing her, his face lit up with that smile so uncannily like James's. "Mom, look, I'm Iron Man." Sarah approached, forcing a smile. "Wow, And who are your friends? Lucas is Captain America, and Pedro is Thor, he explained excitedly. And then, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, he added, "Did you know the man with the big office also likes Iron Man?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know that?" "I saw him the other day with an Iron Man mug on his desk," Nate said simply, then went back to playing with his friends. Sarah frowned. Nate hadn't set foot in James's office since that day. How could he have seen? In the days that followed, Sarah began noticing small things. How James would casually appear at the coffee spot near the playground during lunchtime. How he always seemed to have a meeting scheduled on the daycare's floor. How his eyes quietly followed Nate down the hallway when they occasionally passed by. One afternoon, while organizing some files in her office, Sarah found a drawing Nate had made earlier. Her heart clenched at the scene portrayed in a child's scrawl, 3 stick figures, with the smaller one in the middle holding hands with the 2 bigger ones. Written above them, in shaky letters, "Me, Mum, and Man from the big office." "What's that?" James's voice startled her. He stood at the door, eyes fixed on the drawing in her hands. "A drawing," she replied curtly, slipping it into a drawer. "Did you need something?" But James didn't answer. His gaze seemed distant, as though looking at something beyond the office walls. "My dad had an office like that," he said suddenly, his voice strangely gentle. "Big, overlooking the city. I used to draw pictures for him too." Sarah watched as a shadow crossed his face. "He never put them up," James continued. "He said an office wasn't a place for a child's doodles. That I needed to grow up and understand the business world, had no room for sentimentality." "And you believed him," Sarah murmured softly. James blinked, as if waking from a trance. His expression shut down again. "I need the last quarter's reports," he said brusquely, turning to leave. "He's wrong, you know," Sarah called after him, making him pause. "Your dad. About there being no room for sentimentality. Some of the best CEOs I know are also wonderful parents." James didn't reply, but Sarah noticed how his shoulders tensed before he walked away. The following week, Sarah was supervising Nate at the corporate playground during her lunch break when she noticed movement at James's window. He was up there, watching the scene below, wearing an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Of course, Nate spotted him too. "Look, Mom, it's the man who looks like me." Sarah's heart twisted when she saw James quickly retreat from the window, as though caught doing something he shouldn't. Later that day, she passed by his office and found him seated, looking at an old photo. It showed a stern man in a perfect suit, holding the hand of a small boy, a boy with the same green eyes now shared by Nate. "You don't have to be like him," Sarah said softly from the doorway. James looked up, startled. For a moment he seemed vulnerable, almost lost. Then, like a curtain being drawn, his face hardened. "I didn't authorize your entry, Miss Cooper." Sarah sighed. "No, you didn't. But you know what Nate told me today. He said you must be really lonely up here in that big office. Maybe that's why you watch us from afar." "I don't—" "Please," Sarah raised a hand. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you haven't been watching. The question is, how much longer are you going to settle for just being an observer in your own son's life?" James rose from his chair abruptly. "I believe I've already made my position clear on this." "Yes, you have," Sarah said sadly. "And you know what's even sadder? While you're here repeating your father's mistakes, there's a little boy downstairs who still believes you can be different, that you can be better." She turned to leave one last time. "Nate has a recital at the daycare next week. Thursday, 3 p.m. He'll be Iron Man in a little superhero play. I know you probably won't show up, but I thought you should know." Sarah left James alone with his thoughts and the old photo in his hand. Through the window, the sounds of children laughing at the playground could be heard, a constant reminder of the life going on below, while he stayed isolated at the top. That night, after tucking Nate in, Sarah found another drawing in his backpack. This one showed the man from the big office alone, wearing a sad face. Next to him, Nate had written in his shaky handwriting, "He needs friends." Sarah stored the drawing with the others in a growing folder. One day, she thought, maybe James would be ready to see them. ready to understand that being a parent didn't mean repeating past mistakes, that sometimes the bravest act of all is letting yourself be loved by a child. For now, she'd keep protecting Nate, ensuring he grew up knowing he was loved unconditionally. And if James ever decided to be part of that story, well, that would be his choice to make. The intercom buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Amanda. "Miss Cooper, sorry to bother you so late, but I thought you should know. Mr. Morrison is still in his office, and he's looking at the security camera footage from the playground from this afternoon when Nate was playing." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a confusing mix of emotions. "Thanks for letting me know, Amanda." After hanging up, Sarah walked into Nate's room. Her son slept peacefully, hugging his Iron Man plush, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around him. She adjusted the blanket, once again noticing how his profile was identical to James's. "Maybe one day, my love," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Maybe one day he'll realize what he's missing." In the lofty office above, James Morrison continued watching the security footage, observing a 4-year-old boy who smiled exactly the way he used to smile at that age, a boy who, despite all his efforts to keep his distance, had already found a way to occupy his thoughts. And somewhere between fear and denial, a small voice in his mind began to question whether it was time to stop repeating old mistakes and start writing a different story. Nate's cough echoed through the small apartment, each bout making Sarah wince in concern. It was the third consecutive night he could barely sleep, and his fever refused to break despite medication. "Mom," he called weakly from his room, his voice hoarse. "It's hard to breathe." Sarah rushed to him, her heart clenching at how pale his face looked, except for the red, feverish blotches on his cheeks. She placed a hand on his forehead. He was burning up. "Let's check your temperature, sweetie." The thermometer read 103.6 degrees Celsius. Far too high. Dangerously high. "Okay, that's enough waiting," she decided, picking him up. "We're going to the hospital." It was almost midnight when they arrived at the ER. Sarah had considered taking Nate to the nearest public hospital, but something in her maternal instincts drove her to St. Joseph's Medical Center, even though it would cost more. The waiting room was surprisingly busy for a Tuesday night. Nate trembled in her arms, alternating between chills and coughing fits that sounded like they were tearing his small chest apart. "Please," she begged the receptionist. "He has a really high fever and is struggling to breathe." "Fill out these forms," the woman replied mechanically, pushing a clipboard toward her. "A doctor will call you as soon as possible." Sarah looked down at the paperwork, then at her sick child, feeling utterly powerless. That's when a familiar voice broke through the air. "Sarah?" She turned, surprised to see Amanda standing there, looking concerned. "Amanda? What are you doing here?" "I brought my sister," she explained quickly. Then her eyes widened at Nate's condition. "Oh my God, he's burning up!" Before Sarah could respond, Amanda was already on her phone. "Don't worry, I'll fix this." Sarah watched, confused, as Amanda typed out a quick text. Less than 2 minutes later, the ER doors swung open and a medical team approached. "Miss Cooper," said a middle-aged doctor, "please come with me. We'll examine Nate immediately." "But how?" Sarah began to ask. Then she saw him, standing near the ER entrance, still in his impeccable suit despite the late hour, was James Morrison. His eyes were locked on Nate, genuine worry etched on his face. The next hour went by in a blur of tests, X-rays and medical jargon, severe bacterial pneumonia requiring immediate hospitalization. Sarah could only nod as she gripped Nate's hot little hand, absorbing all the information. "Don't worry about paperwork or costs," the doctor assured. "It's all taken care of. We'll move him to a private room in pediatrics right away." Sarah knew exactly who had taken care of it, but at that moment, gratitude outweighed any pride or lingering resentment. All that mattered was Nate receiving the best care possible. It was past 3 a.m. when Nate finally fell asleep, breathing a little easier thanks to medication and supplemental oxygen. Sarah sat by his bed, holding his hand when she sensed a presence at the door. James stood there, hands in his pockets, looking strangely vulnerable in his rumpled suit. "How is he?" he asked quietly, taking a hesitant step inside the room. "Better," Sarah replied, surprised he was still around. "The fever's down a bit. They say the antibiotics should start working in the next 24 hours. James nodded, moving closer to the bed. His eyes took in Nate's sleeping face, noticing the similarities he'd tried so hard to deny. "Does he have asthma?" he asked suddenly. Sarah frowned. "No. Why?" "I did," James said distantly. "I had pneumonia twice as a child. The second time was complicated." Something in his voice made Sarah look at him more closely. "Your parents must have been so worried." A bitter smile curved James's lips. "My father was in the middle of an important merger. He sent his secretary to check on me a few times. My mother, well, she tried, but he didn't approve of excessive displays of emotion." Sarah's heart ached at the image of a young James alone in a hospital room. "Nate is lucky to have you," he continued, surprising her. You're a good mom, Sarah." It was the first time he'd used her first name since their initial confrontation. Something in the atmosphere of the hospital room had changed, as if the usual walls between them had temporarily dropped. "Thank you," she replied softly, "and thank you for all this. The hospital, the doctors." "Don't thank me," James interrupted, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "It's the least I mean, he's—" His voice faltered. "Your son," Sarah finished gently. James didn't reply, but neither did he deny it. Instead, he took another step toward the bed. Hesitantly, he reached out and lightly touched Nate's fingers. The contact seemed to send a shockwave through him. Sarah saw something shift in his eyes, a crack forming in a very old wall. "He likes superheroes," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Especially Iron Man." A faint smile tugged at James's lips. "Really?" He has all the toys, clothes, even a lunchbox. Says he wants to build robots when he grows up." I liked superheroes as a kid too," James admitted. "I had a huge comic book collection hidden under my bed. My father thought it was a waste of time." Sarah watched him closely, noticing how his normally rigid posture had softened. "Do you still have those comics?" "No," he replied, sadness lacing his voice. "My father found them and, well, said it was time to grow up." Nate stirred in his sleep, coughing lightly. Instinctively, both Sarah and James moved to adjust him, their hands briefly touching over the blanket. James pulled back as though shocked, the professional mask returning to his face. I have to go. I have an early meeting tomorrow." "James," Sarah called out as he reached the door. You can come back if you want." "I'm sure Nate would like that." He paused, his back still turned. For a moment, Sarah thought he would leave without answering, but then, very quietly, "Maybe." In the days that followed, to Sarah's surprise, James actually did come back. His visit started off brief and discreet, always with some professional excuse like needing a signature or discussing a report. But then Nate woke up during one of those visits. "Hey," he exclaimed weakly, his eyes bright even through the fever. "It's the man from the big office." James froze, clearly not prepared for direct interaction with the child, but Nate, in a kid's direct honesty, gave him no chance to escape. "You like Iron Man too? I saw your mug the other day." Yes," James answered hesitantly. "I do." "What's your favorite part of the movie?" Nate asked, followed by a small coughing fit. And so, before he knew it, James found himself in an animated discussion about superheroes with a 4-year-old. Sarah watched with a mixture of surprise and emotion as James's normally serious face lit up whenever Nate laughed at something he said. The visits got longer and more frequent. James began bringing small gifts, first comic books that were lying around, then board games to pass the time. One afternoon he arrived with a bag full of miniature Avengers figures. "I was passing by a store and, well, thought he might like them," he mumbled, looking almost embarrassed. Sarah smiled as she watched Nate's eyes go wide at the sight of the toys. "Thank you," he exclaimed, then fixed James with a serious look. "Do you want to play with me?" To Sarah's absolute surprise, James nodded. Soon, the CEO of Morrison Enterprises was sitting on the hospital floor, moving superhero miniatures around and using different voices for each character. "You're really good at this," Nate remarked, making James blush slightly. "I had some practice when I was a kid," he admitted, throwing a quick glance at Sarah. One night, after a particularly long play session, Nate began to yawn. "Time for bed, sweetie," Sarah said, starting to gather the toys. "I don't want to," Nate whined sleepily. "I want James to tell me another story." It was the first time he'd used James's name, and Sarah saw how it affected him. His green eyes, the same ones he shared with Nate, gleamed with something suspiciously close to tears. "Please," Nate insisted, looking at James with those eyes that mirrored his own. "Just one more story." James glanced at Sarah, who gave a slight nod. "Okay," he agreed, his voice husky. "One more story." He sat on the edge of the bed and began a tale about a boy who dreamed of flying. Sarah realized it wasn't a superhero story. It seemed more personal, maybe a memory from his own childhood. When Nate finally fell asleep, James remained sitting there for a moment, watching him. Then, in a gesture that seemed perfectly natural, he leaned over and placed a gentle kiss on the boy's forehead. Only as he straightened up did he realize what he'd done. His expression was a mixture of panic and confusion, as if he didn't recognize his own actions. "James," Sarah said softly, "it's okay, you know. It's normal to feel—" "No," he interrupted, standing abruptly. "I can't. This isn't—" But before he could leave, Nate's drowsy voice stopped him. "Good night, James. Are you coming back tomorrow?" Sarah saw the exact moment something changed in James's eyes. A battle fought between fear and something stronger, deeper. Yes," he said quietly. "I'll come back tomorrow." After James left, Sarah sat in the chair by Nate's bed, her heart a swirl of emotions. She'd spent so much time shielding her son, building walls to keep him safe, that she wasn't prepared to see those walls begin to crumble. James Morrison was changing. Slowly, reluctantly, but changing. The question was whether it would last, or if he'd retreat behind his barriers again once Nate got better. As if answering her thoughts, her phone buzzed with a message. "Does he like pancakes? I was thinking of bringing some tomorrow morning. Jay." Sarah smiled, typing back, "He loves them, especially with chocolate syrup." His response came almost immediately. "Got it." Looking at her sleeping child, Sarah allowed herself a glimmer of hope. Maybe sometimes a storm was needed to tear down old walls and build something new, something better. And if this storm had come in the form of pneumonia and nights at the hospital, well, maybe that was the price to see a father and son finally start to build a bridge across the gap between them. James Morrison stared at his laptop screen without actually seeing it. His mind was miles away, replaying the morning's scene. Nate, fully recovered from pneumonia, giggling as he tried to balance a spoon on his nose in the executive dining room. The echo of that little laugh still resonated in James's ears, stirring feelings he wasn't sure how to handle. "Mr. Morrison," his assistant called for the third time, finally catching his attention. "Your next meeting starts in 5 minutes. Cancel," he replied automatically, then frowned. "No, wait. Who's the meeting with?" "The Finance Committee, sir, to discuss next quarter's projections." James ran a hand over his face, trying to refocus. "Right. Give me a few minutes." Once the assistant left, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes falling on a new photo on his desk, a change from his previously austere decor. It showed Nate beaming widely, wearing a tiny lab coat given by the hospital staff as a discharge gift. The sound of children's laughter drew his attention to the window. Down on the company playground, a group of kids was enjoying their break at the corporate daycare. James spotted Nate immediately. It was unsettling how natural that had become, this ability to find his son in any crowd, his son. The word still triggered a swirling mix of conflicting emotions, mostly fear. Fear of failing, hurting, or becoming. "You're not your father," Sarah had said the previous evening during one of their tense conversations in her office. "But if you keep letting fear dictate your actions, you'll end up making the same mistakes." James closed his eyes, recalling the nightmare that had jolted him awake last night. He was sitting in an office identical to his father's, ignoring the drawings a small Nate was trying to show him. An office isn't a place for sentimentality, he heard himself say, echoing the words that had scarred his own childhood. He'd woken up in a cold sweat, the image of Nate's hurt face still vivid in his mind. A soft knock at the door pulled him back to the present. It was Sarah, holding a folder of documents as a pretext for her visit. "The reports you requested," she said, placing the folder on his desk. Then, more gently, "He asked about you this morning." James felt his heart tighten. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know why you never come to our home," Sarah replied, taking a seat opposite him. "Lucas, a friend from daycare, was talking about how his dad reads him bedtime stories." "Sarah, No," she interrupted, raising a hand. "I don't want any more excuses, James. It's been 3 weeks since he got out of the hospital. You keep hovering in this limbo, showing up for a few meals at work and sending gifts, but keeping your distance. It's not fair to him." "You think I don't know that?" James burst out, standing abruptly. "You think I don't think about that every minute of every day? That I don't feel like a coward every time I see his face light up at the sight of me, knowing I don't deserve that smile?" "Then do something about it," Sarah shot back, also standing. "Stop hiding behind your fear and be the father he deserves." "What if I don't know how?" James's voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability that startled them both. "What if I only know how to be how he was?" The silence that followed was heavy with old wounds. Sarah walked around the desk, stopping in front of him. "James," she said softly, "nobody's born knowing how to be a parent. It's something you learn day by day, and you're not alone in this. I can help you, if you let me." He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Where do we start?" The rest of the week was a crash course in Parenting 101. Sarah began with the basics: Nate's routine, his likes, his fears, his quirks. "He won't sleep without his plush T-Rex," she explained as they walked down the corridor after a meeting. "And he always needs a glass of water before bed, but only half, otherwise he'll wake up in the middle of the night needing the bathroom." James absorbed every detail like he was studying for the biggest deal of his life. In a sense, his first attempt at making Nate a snack was memorable. Sarah found them in the executive pantry, flour everywhere, while James desperately tried to salvage what was supposed to be a pancake. "How can this be so hard?" he muttered in frustration. "I run a multi-million-dollar company." Nate, sitting on the counter swinging his legs, was giggling uncontrollably. "It looks like a sock." Sarah couldn't help but laugh too. "Maybe we should start simpler. How about sandwiches?" Small victories began piling up. James discovered Nate loved it when he used different voices for each character during story time. He realized his son had a knack for numbers, always wanting to help with spreadsheets on the computer. He learned that Nate, just like young James once had, harbored a secret fear of thunder. But there were tough moments too, like when Nate asked innocently over lunch, "Why don't you live with us like Lucas's dad lives with him?" James froze, his fork suspended midair. Sarah gently intervened. "Honey, remember we talked about how some families are different. Some kids live with both parents together, others just with one." "But why?" Nate insisted, his big green eyes, so much like James's, full of innocent curiosity. "Because," James began, then paused, searching for the right words. "Because sometimes grown-ups take a while to learn important things. Like how to be a good dad, for example." Sarah's heart twisted at the honesty in his answer. The real turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. James had timidly suggested taking Nate to the park, alone for the first time. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, concerned. "He can get pretty hyper when he's excited." "I need to learn at some point, right?" James replied, nervously adjusting casual clothes that looked unfamiliar on his body, accustomed to Italian suits. Sarah watched from a distance, hiding behind a tree, as father and son explored the park. She saw James, initially stiff and awkward, slowly relax as he joined Nate's play. She observed how his face lit up when he laughed, a genuine laugh, free of corporate constraints. "Higher! Higher!" Nate's voice echoed as James pushed him on the swing. "Hold on tight, buddy," James called, and there was so much affection in that single word that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. The most touching moment came when Nate fell, scraping his knee. Sarah had to fight the urge to run to him. But then she witnessed something that stopped her in her tracks. James knelt in front of Nate, wiping his tears with surprising gentleness and whispering something that made Nate laugh through his tears. Later, as they returned to the car, Nate was fast asleep in James's arms, utterly exhausted but with a content smile on his face. "He had a great time," Sarah commented as James carefully settled Nate into his booster seat. "So did I," James admitted quietly, his eyes on his son's sleeping face. "I never thought it could feel like this." "Like what?" "So natural," he replied, closing the car door gently. "My father always said showing affection made men weak, that we needed emotional distance to be respected. But today," he trailed off, searching for words, "today I felt stronger than ever." Sarah felt a warm glow in her chest. "It's because you're finally being true to yourself, James. You're letting yourself be who you really are, not who your father wanted you to be." He stared at her for a long moment, then said something that completely caught her off guard. "Thank you, Sarah, not just for today, but for not giving up, for giving him the chance to have a dad, even when I didn't deserve it." "He loves you, you know," Sarah responded softly. "Unconditionally, the way only children can." James swallowed hard, looking once more at Nate through the car window. "I think I'm finally beginning to understand why." That night, after putting Nate to bed, Sarah received a text from James. "He left this in my pocket today," it read, followed by a photo of a drawing, 3 stick figures, the smaller one in the middle, holding hands with the 2 bigger ones. At the top, in a child's handwriting, "My family." Sarah smiled, typing back, "He has a way of tearing down walls, doesn't he?" The reply took a few minutes. "Yes. And maybe some walls need to be torn down." Lying in her bed later, Sarah reflected on life's surprises. A few weeks ago, she was terrified James might try to take Nate from her. Now she was helping him become the father her son deserved. There was still a long road ahead. James still wrestled with his inner demons, and ghosts of his father's disapproval still loomed. But today, at the park, she had seen something different in his eyes. Determination. The determination of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. And maybe that was the real miracle. Not just Nate's recovery from pneumonia, but James's recovery from decades of emotional pain, one child's smile at a time. James Morrison straightened his tie for the 10th time in 5 minutes, glaring at his reflection in the car's rearview mirror. The crumpled invitation beside him seemed to taunt him. "Family Day at Little Stars Elementary. Come see our school community." "It's just a school presentation," he muttered to himself, but his sweaty palms on the steering wheel told a different story. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Don't be late. Nate's excited to show you his project." James took a deep breath and finally exited the car. The school's parking lot was filled with family SUVs and minivans. His sleek sports car looked strangely out of place, much like he felt. At the entrance, families gathered, chatting excitedly. James could hear children's laughter and music coming from inside, mixed with the typical buzz of school events. "James!" Nate's voice rang out above the clamor, and soon the boy came running toward him, wearing a t-shirt covered in colorful paint. "You really came!" The genuine surprise in his voice made something twist in James's chest. "Of course I came, buddy. I wouldn't miss this for anything." Sarah followed close behind, smiling discreetly. "I'm glad you managed to leave work early." "Actually," James cleared his throat, fiddling with his tie again, "I had all my afternoon meetings cancelled." Sarah's surprised look quickly turned into an approving smile. "Well then, ready for a complete tour of Nate's classroom? Come on, come on." Nate pulled his hand, practically dragging him down the hall decorated with children's artwork. "I want to show you my science project." James allowed himself to be guided, marveling at how his son greeted practically every child and adult they passed. Nate was clearly popular, his natural charm attracting people like a magnet of smiles. "Hello, Mr. Morrison," a young teacher greeted them. "Nate wouldn't stop talking about you coming today. He's one of our brightest students, especially in math." "Just like his dad," Sarah murmured softly beside him, making James feel a sudden surge of pride he hadn't expected. The classroom was a kaleidoscope of color and activity. Each child had a designated area to display their project, and Nate practically bounced with excitement as he showed off his creation, a papier-mâché volcano that actually erupted using baking soda and vinegar. "Very impressive," James said sincerely, crouching down to examine it. "How did you learn to do this?" "Mom helped me make the outside, but I did the research on the chemical reaction," Nate explained proudly. "Did you know real volcanoes are way hotter than the lava we make?" James grinned, recognizing his own thirst for knowledge in his son's eager eyes. "Did you know there are volcanoes under the ocean?" Nate's eyes went wide. "Really? How do they not go out with all that water?" What followed was an animated discussion about underwater volcanoes, with Sarah watching affectionately as father and son delved into their own world of scientific discovery. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison," a voice interrupted. "Oh, actually," Sarah began to correct, but the teacher continued. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of moving Nate into some more advanced math classes. He's clearly beyond his current level." James and Sarah exchanged a look, both realizing they'd need to start making important decisions together. "Maybe we can schedule a meeting next week," Sarah suggested, "so we can talk about all the details properly." "Of course," the teacher smiled. "It's wonderful to see such involved parents. It makes a huge difference for the kids." After the teacher left, James and Sarah stood in a moment of thoughtful silence. "I think we need to establish some guidelines," Sarah said finally. "About big decisions, routines, boundaries." "Co-parenting," James finished, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. "Exactly. How about coffee tomorrow to discuss?" The next morning, at a small cafe away from the office, they began laying the foundations for their new family dynamic. "He needs consistency," Sarah explained. "Clear rules that are the same at my place and yours." "My place," James repeated pensively. "Never thought I'd need to make my apartment child-friendly." "Well, if you really want him to stay weekends with you." "I do," James interrupted firmly. "I'll make the necessary changes. I've actually already started." He showed her pictures on his phone. A bedroom being transformed. Walls painted a cheerful color. A new superhero-themed bed. "James, that's amazing," Sarah smiled, genuinely impressed. "There's more," he said, switching to a document on his tablet. "I'm implementing some changes in the company. Expanding daycare, offering extended parental leave, more flexible hours for parents." "Wow," Sarah blinked in surprise. "That's pretty progressive for Morrison Enterprises." "Let's just say I've gained a new perspective lately," he gave a slight smile. "Plus, happier employees are more productive. It's just good business." Sarah laughed. "Still trying to rationalize your emotional decisions?" "Old habits die hard," he shrugged, though there was a playful sparkle in his eyes. Nate's first overnight stay at James's place happened on a Saturday. Sarah spent the entire morning packing and repacking his bag, triple-checking that she'd included the plush T-Rex and detailed instructions on his bedtime routine. "Mom," Nate rolled his eyes in a surprisingly grown-up way for a 4-year-old. "James already knows all this stuff. We practiced, remember?" Indeed, James had spent the previous week training with Nate during lunch breaks, memorizing every detail of his nighttime routine. When the doorbell finally rang, Sarah had to resist the urge to bombard James with more instructions. He looked nervous enough, though he tried to hide it. "Everything will be fine," she assured him, surprising herself with the confidence in her own voice. "Call me if anything comes up," James replied, then corrected himself. "I mean, if you need, not that you will, I can handle." "James," Sarah cut him off kindly, "you two will have fun." And surprisingly, they really did. The text updates James sent throughout the evening showed Nate utterly delighted with his new room, both of them building a pillow fort in the living room, baking cookies, slightly burned but edible, and finally, Nate fast asleep in his new bed, hugging his T-Rex. The last photo of the night showed James sitting by Nate's bed, just watching him sleep with an expression of pure love on his face that made Sarah's heart constrict in an unexpected way. The following weeks brought a new routine. James became more actively involved in Nate's daily life, not just in fun moments, but in the mundane aspects too. Doctor's appointments, shopping for school supplies, decisions about extracurricular activities. It was during one such discussion about activities that Sarah realized how much things had changed. Swimming would be great for his physical development, James argued, but he really seems more interested in robotics classes. He could do both, Sarah pondered. Alternate the days. Wouldn't that be too tiring? We can try for a month and see how he adapts. James smiled. Look at us, having a civilized discussion about extracurricular activities. Who would have thought, huh? Sarah laughed. Last time we argued, you were threatening to fire me. James's smile faded. Sarah, I'm sorry about that. About everything, actually. I was a total jerk, she offered, but her tone was light. That, he laughed self-consciously. Thank you for not giving up. The moment was interrupted by Nate running into the room. I'm hungry. Dinner's almost ready, Sarah said, starting to stand. Why don't we have dinner together? James suggested hesitantly. There's a nice Italian place nearby. Very family-friendly, nothing fancy. Sarah hesitated a moment, then saw the hopeful look on Nate's face. Why not? The restaurant was cozy, with checkered tablecloths and candles in old wine bottles. Nate was mesmerized by the chef tossing pizza dough into the air, while James and Sarah discovered they could actually hold a pleasant conversation when not arguing. Then I told Mr. Johnson that underwater volcanoes are cooler than regular ones, Nate explained, excited, between bites of spaghetti. Really? James grinned. And what did he say? That I should do a presentation about it at the science fair. Wow, that's awesome, sweetheart, Sarah exclaimed. When's the fair? In 3 weeks, Nate answered, then looked shyly at James. Can you come? I wouldn't miss it for anything, James replied without hesitation, and the smile he received in return was worth more than any business deal he'd ever closed. Sarah watched the exchange with a soft smile. It was amazing how 3 people who barely knew each other a few months ago now felt so right together. What are you thinking about? James asked quietly, while Nate was distracted by his dessert. How things change, she answered honestly. How sometimes we need to lose control to find something better. James nodded thoughtfully. You know what's funny? I spent so long trying to outdo my father in business that I never realized there were far more important things to prove. Like what? Like the fact that success isn't just measured in numbers on a spreadsheet, he said, glancing affectionately at Nate. Sometimes it's measured in smiles, bedtime stories, papier-mâché volcanoes. Sarah felt that warm glow again. How you really have changed, James. Thanks to you two, he replied softly. You showed me there's more to life than contracts and mergers, that sometimes the best deals are the ones made with the heart. Careful, Sarah teased, or people will start saying the fearsome James Morrison is going soft. Let them talk, he shrugged, surprising her. Some things are worth more than a reputation. That night, after they tucked Nate into bed, he insisted they both read him a story. Sarah and James stood in the doorway of the apartment. That was nice, she said. Really nice. It was, James agreed. Maybe we can do it again. I think Nate would love that, Sarah smiled. And you? The question caught her off guard. Yeah, I think I'd like it too. They said their goodbyes with a slightly awkward but warm wave. Driving home, Sarah reflected on how the most important bridges weren't always the obvious ones. Sometimes they were built slowly, brick by brick, story by story, dinner by dinner. And maybe, just maybe, the bridge they were building would be strong enough to hold not just the present, but any storm the future might bring. Sarah stared at the computer screen, her eyes aching from hours of analyzing spreadsheets and financial reports. Something was wrong, very wrong. The numbers just didn't add up. And the deeper she dug, the more irregularities she found. This can't be right, she murmured, rubbing her tired eyes. It was nearly midnight, and the office was empty except for her. Nate was spending his first full week of overnights at James's place, an arrangement that still made her nervous, but had gone surprisingly well so far. Initially, she thought the discrepancies were simple accounting errors. But after 3 nights of meticulous scrutiny, a disturbing pattern emerged. Large sums of money were being systematically diverted through a complex web of seemingly legitimate transactions. The worst part, All the suspicious transactions bore the digital signature of Robert Sterling, the main partner at Morrison Enterprises, and James's personal friend of over 2 decades. Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of her discovery settle on her shoulders. What was she supposed to do? If she was wrong, she could destroy not only her own career, but also James's long-standing friendship. And if she was right, well, the implications were even worse. Her phone vibrated with a text from James. "Nate just fell asleep. He asked me to say goodnight to you." Attached was a photo of Nate asleep in his new room, hugging his beloved T-Rex. Sarah smiled at the photo, her heart clenching. Over the past months, she'd watched an incredible transformation in James, from a distant CEO to a dedicated father, and surprisingly, a friend. The idea of possibly shattering the trust they'd built was terrifying, but then her eyes returned to the figures on the screen, and she knew she had no choice. If there was one thing James valued as much as his newfound family, it was integrity. Early the next morning, Sarah was in her office before sunrise, reviewing her findings for the 100th time. When her secretary announced James had arrived, her stomach twisted in knots. "Good morning," he smiled as he entered, looking more relaxed than usual. "Nate asked if we could make pancakes again for breakfast." "James," Sarah interrupted gently, "I need to show you something." Something in her tone made his smile vanish instantly. "What's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Please, sit down and try to keep an open mind." Over the next 45 minutes, she methodically presented her discovery: the pattern of diversion, the suspicious transfers, the shell companies carefully disguised as legitimate suppliers. James was silent for so long afterward that Sarah began to worry. "If I'm wrong," she started hesitantly, "I'll understand completely if you want to." "Are you sure?" he cut in, his voice dangerously calm. "Absolutely," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I checked every figure 3 times. The evidence is—" "No," James interrupted again, finally looking at her. "Are you sure you want to involve yourself in this? Robert can be ruthless when cornered. If he finds out you've been investigating—" Sarah blinked, surprised. You believe me?" James ran a hand through his hair, now a gesture she recognized as one of emotional turmoil. "Sarah, if there's one thing I've learned these past months, it's that you can't lie, especially about something of this magnitude. But he's your friend, and you're the mother of my son," James replied simply. "Besides, you just showed me solid evidence that my so-called friend is stealing from my company. The question is, what do we do now?" The "we" in his question did not go unnoticed by Sarah. In the weeks that followed Bond, they worked tirelessly, always after Nate's bedtime. The little playroom James had created in his apartment became a makeshift command center, with spreadsheets and documents spread across the floor once Nate was asleep. "It's like every answer leads to 10 more questions," Sarah sighed one night, surrounded by papers. James nodded absently, laptop balanced on his knees as he chased another lead. "I just found 3 more shell companies, all registered in the Cayman Islands. How did he manage to hide this for so long?" "Robert's always been brilliant with numbers," James replied bitterly. "That's why I brought him on board after college. I thought his intelligence would be an asset." Sarah heard the pain in his voice. "It's not your fault, James. Sometimes people surprise us in the worst ways. Just like they can surprise us in the best ways," he said, giving her a meaningful look. The moment was interrupted by a small sound in the hallway. Nate stood at the door, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "I can't sleep," he mumbled. "Can I stay with you?" James and Sarah exchanged quick glances as they discreetly began collecting the scattered documents. "Sure, buddy," James smiled, opening his arms. Nate climbed onto his lap, peering curiously at the papers. "Are you doing homework?" he asked innocently. Sarah laughed. "Something like that. It's a really important work project." "You both look happy working together," Nate observed sleepily. "Like when we do science projects." James and Sarah locked eyes over Nate's head. It was true. Despite the seriousness of the situation, there was something oddly comforting about working as a team, trusting each other with something so important. It was during one of those late-night sessions that they made the most shocking discovery. "James," Sarah called, her voice tight, I think I found where the money's going. She turned her laptop toward him, revealing a set of transactions leading to a newly registered holding company. Phoenix Technologies, James read aloud. Then his eyes widened. Oh wait, that's the company Robert always dreamed of starting, Sarah finished. He's using Morrison Enterprises funds to finance his own rival business. James stayed silent for a long moment, a mixture of rage and hurt coloring his expression. 25 years, he said at last. 25 years of friendship, and His voice cracked. Before she realized what she was doing, Sarah moved to sit beside him on the couch, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. You know what's worse, James went on, voice hoarse. He was the best man at my wedding. He was there when my father died. He was the only person I ever truly considered family before. He paused, glancing at her. Before Nate, Sarah said quietly. Before you two, he corrected, surprising her. You both showed me what family actually means. Real loyalty, not this. A warmth spread through Sarah's chest at his words. So what do we do? Her use of we was natural now, and James seemed to draw strength from it. We confront him, but carefully. He probably has an escape plan. They worked until dawn, devising a strategy. Sarah discovered that watching Nate play superheroes had given her a unique perspective on ambushes and traps. It's like that time Nate caught you trying to swap out his old T-Rex for a new one, she explained. We have to let Robert think he's in control until the last moment. James couldn't help but grin at the comparison. I still can't believe you kept the old T-Rex. Always good to have a plan B, Sarah teased. The plan they devised was complex yet elegant. Using Sarah's accounting skills and James's inside knowledge of company procedures, they set a trap that would give Robert exactly what he wanted. So it seemed. Extraordinary board meeting tomorrow, James announced the next morning, knowing news would reach Robert quickly. I'll propose a complete corporate restructuring. As expected, Robert showed up in his office less than an hour later, barely masking his concern under a veneer of friendly concern. James, are you sure this is the right time for a restructuring? He asked, sitting casually in front of James's desk. The market's volatile and, actually, James interrupted, keeping his tone deliberately casual, I think it's the perfect time for some changes. Robert paled slightly but forced a smile. What sort of changes? Oh, you'll find out tomorrow. James smiled, that same cold, calculated smile he'd learned from his father. I'm sure it'll be interesting. After Robert left, Sarah slipped in through the side door of the office, where she'd been listening. He took the bait, she said, adrenaline making her voice tremble. I can already see movements in the accounts we're monitoring. James nodded gravely. He'll try to move everything tonight. Can you track it? With the IT team you assigned, definitely. They worked tirelessly the rest of the day, monitoring Robert's every move. Just as predicted, once business hours ended, a flurry of transfers began. He's panicking, Sarah noted, watching the small errors Robert was making in his haste. He's getting sloppy. Good, James replied, his voice hard. The more evidence, the better. It was close to midnight when the final set of transfers was initiated. Sarah and James watched in silence as the numbers shifted on the screen, exactly as they had anticipated. There, Sarah whispered. Now. With a single command, the trap they'd prepared was sprung. All the transfers were automatically reversed, and a silent alert was sent to the proper authorities. We should go home, James said softly. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Sarah agreed, starting to gather her belongings. That's when she noticed the odd look on James's face. What is it? You said home, he observed. Not my home or your home. Just home. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. I guess after so many nights working together. It's good, James interrupted gently. It's right. They stood there for a long moment, years of shared history passing between them, from strangers to reluctant parents, from adversaries to allies, and now, something more. James, Sarah began hesitantly, after all this is over. Daddy! Mum! Nate's voice echoed in the corridor, interrupting the moment. He was running toward them in his pajamas, followed by a breathless Amanda. "I'm so sorry," Amanda panted. "He woke up and insisted on looking for you both." "It's okay," James smiled, picking Nate up. "We were just leaving for home, buddy." "All together?" Nate asked hopefully. James looked at Sarah, a silent question in his eyes. "All together," she confirmed, smiling. As they walked to the elevator, Nate already nodding off in James's arms, Sarah reflected on life's ironies. An investigation into fraud had somehow helped build something real. A betrayal had led to deeper trust. "What are you thinking about?" James asked quietly once they were in the elevator. "How sometimes we have to lose something to find something better," she replied, looking significantly at him and Nate. James nodded, understanding perfectly. "Tomorrow we'll face a storm," he said softly. "But at least we're not facing it alone anymore." Sarah smiled, feeling a certainty she hadn't known she was searching for settle in her heart. No matter what happened in tomorrow's board meeting, they would face it together, like a family. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest truth they'd uncovered amid all the lies, that sometimes the strongest kind of love is born in the most unexpected places, not just in moments of joy, but through late-night work sessions, mutual trust, and the determination to do the right thing no matter the cost. The Morrison Enterprises auditorium was packed. Employees from every department crowded in, whispering among themselves about the dramatic events of the last 24 hours. Robert Sterling's arrest had been front-page news in all the financial papers, and rumors about Sarah Cooper's role in exposing the scheme were spreading through the hallways. James Morrison stood on stage, his suit immaculate as always, but there was a new air about him, a gentleness rarely seen before, combined with a strength that seemed to come from a place deeper than mere corporate authority. "Good morning, everyone," his voice resonated through the auditorium, silencing the chatter. "These last few days have been challenging, to say the least." He paused, his eyes seeking out Sarah in the front row. She smiled encouragingly, Nate on her lap, wearing a miniature version of his father's suit, a surprise gift James had left at her apartment that morning. "When my father founded this company," James continued, "he believed that success in business meant numbers on a spreadsheet, soaring profits, constant expansion. For a long time, I followed in his footsteps, believing that was the only measure of value that mattered." His voice trembled slightly, and he stopped for a moment to steady himself. "I was wrong. Over the past few months, I've learned that true success can't be measured by dollars and cents alone. True success is about integrity, about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. It's about building not just a company, but a family." His eyes found Sarah's again, and something unspoken passed between them, the awareness of how much they had grown together. "When we discovered discrepancies in our records, my initial reaction was disbelief. Not because the numbers were off, but because the person who brought it to my attention showed more loyalty to this organization in just a few months than my so-called best friend did in decades." Sarah felt her cheeks heat as several people turned to look at her. Sarah Cooper not only uncovered the fraud, but she had the courage to come forward, knowing the personal and professional risks. She showed the kind of integrity I want to be the new standard for this company. James walked off the stage and approached where Sarah sat. "Which is why I'm pleased to announce that Sarah Cooper will be our new Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately, taking over the position once held by Robert Sterling." The auditorium erupted in applause. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as Nate bounced excitedly on her lap, shouting, "My mum's the boss." "But more important than any promotion," James continued once the applause died down, "is what this experience taught us about values, about family." He knelt down in front of Sarah and Nate, not caring that hundreds of employees were watching. "A few months ago, I made the mistake of trying to deny the most precious thing I've ever been given, the chance to be a father, to be part of a family. I was so caught up in appearances and reputation that I nearly lost what truly matters." Nate reached out and touched his father's face with the innocent tenderness only a child could have. "It's okay, Dad. You learned." A ripple of affectionate laughter swept the auditorium, and James couldn't hold back a smile through the tears forming in his eyes. "Yes, buddy, I learned. And I'll keep learning." He stood up, turning back to the audience. "From now on, Morrison Enterprises won't just focus on profits. We'll be a company that values family, integrity, and a healthy work-life balance. He announced a series of changes: an expanded daycare, more flexible schedules for parents, extended parental leave, mentoring programs. The employees applauded enthusiastically. Later in his office, Sarah found James gazing out the window, lost in thought. "That was a beautiful speech," she said softly. "It was honest," he replied, turning to face her. "Every word of it. Including the part about the promotion," she teased lightly. "Especially that part. You've more than earned it." He paused a moment. "Sarah, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." "Look at my new office!" Nate's excited shout cut through the moment. He was running around James's office, which had been modified to include a small, kid-friendly workspace in the corner. "Your new office?" Sarah raised an eyebrow at James. "Well, if I'm reducing my work hours to spend more time with family, I need a junior executive assistant, don't I?" Nate's grin lit up the entire room. "Can I have a desk like yours?" "How about something better?" James suggested. "How about we spend this weekend picking out furniture together? We can make a whole special day of it. Maybe your mom would like to join us." The hopeful look he cast at Sarah didn't go unnoticed. "I think we can arrange that," she smiled. The weekend turned into a celebration of new beginnings. It started with an elaborate breakfast prepared by James. The pancakes were still not perfect, but the intention made up for their slightly burned edges. After choosing the furniture for Nate's office, they went for a walk in the park, bought ice cream, visited the zoo. It was as if they were creating an album of happy memories to make up for all the lost time. "Look, Dad!" Nate yelled excitedly at the zoo. "That dinosaur looks like my T-Rex." "Actually, Champ, that's an Allosaurus," James explained, surprising Sarah with his dinosaur knowledge. Noticing her expression, he shrugged sheepishly. "I've been reading up, so I can, talk to him about what he likes." Sarah felt her heart melt a little more. On Sunday, they decided to have a picnic in the same park where, months before, James had first taken Nate alone. It felt fitting to return there now as a complete family. "Did you know I used to be afraid of parks?" James commented as they set the blanket on the grass. "You? Why?" Sarah asked, surprised. "Too noisy, too chaotic, too happy." He chuckled without humor. "I guess I just didn't know how to handle genuine joy after such a controlled childhood. What about now?" James watched Nate running around with other kids, his laughter ringing through the warm afternoon air. "Now I see that chaos can be beautiful. Sometimes the best things in life can't be controlled or planned. They just happen." Sarah felt a shift in the air between them. "Like what?" "Like one night in Chicago," he replied softly. "Like a 4-year-old tornado bursting into a board meeting, like realizing the person you least expected to trust was the first one to actually deserve it." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt her heart pound. "Sarah, Mom, Dad, look what I found." Nate came running over, proudly holding a colorful feather he must have picked up somewhere. The moment broke, but somehow it didn't matter. There was time. For the first time, they all felt there was plenty of time. They spent the rest of the afternoon playing, talking, simply being together in the same space. As the sun set in shades of pink and orange, Nate dozed off between them on the picnic blanket. "He looks so peaceful," Sarah murmured, running her fingers through her son's hair. "We all are," James replied, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah look at him. His green eyes, the same ones he'd passed on to Nate, shone with quiet emotion. I spent so long chasing what I thought was success, amassing wealth, expanding the company, following in my father's footsteps." He paused, glancing at Nate's sleeping form and then at Sarah. "But now I realize my real fortune is right here. You two are my real fortune." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. "James, let me finish," he said gently, "because it took me too long to say this, and I don't want to waste another minute." He drew a deep breath. "Sarah Cooper, you've taught me more about love, family, and integrity in a few months than I learned in my entire life. You gave me the greatest gift anyone could receive, the chance to be a father. And now, you're giving me something just as precious, The chance to fall in love. Sarah's heart felt like it was about to burst. James, you're completely and hopelessly in love with you? Yes. He smiled the same smile Nate had inherited. And this time, I'm not letting fear stop me from embracing happiness when it's right in front of me. Sarah didn't need words to respond. Her radiant smile, bright as the sunset behind them, said it all. Between them, Nate stirred, a small smile on his lips, as though he could sense the surrounding happiness even in his sleep. And there, in that perfect moment in the park, with the sky painted in dreamy colors and their hearts finally in harmony, the three formed a picture of unconditional love. Not the pristine love of fairy tales, but a real love, built on mistakes and forgiveness, on daily choices to be better for one another. Because sometimes the greatest treasures aren't locked in safes or measured by numbers. Sometimes they're found in sleepy smiles, slightly burnt pancakes, whispered, "I love yous," and families formed not by blood or duty, but by choice and devotion. And that was, without a doubt, the greatest redemption of all.